Hello students, welcome to your first video lesson for virtual pre-algebra. Today we're going to be talking about square roots, okay? Finding square roots of numbers, what numbers we can hopefully pretty easily find the square root of, possibly using a calculator. And then in subsequent videos we'll talk a little bit more about just some different, more interesting things about square roots. But for today, we're going to start with talking about and making note of the idea of a perfect square number. Okay, a perfect square number is a number that is equal to some other whole number multiplied by itself. Okay, an example would be if I were to do 2 times 2, that would equal 4, right? 2 times 2 equals 4. One of the most basic things, one of the first things that we learn in math class. 2 times 2 is 4. So what that means is because 2 multiplied by itself, 2 times another 2, 2 times 2 equals 4, that makes 4 a perfect square number. Okay, so 4 is a perfect square number. So a number that is equal to some other whole number times itself. The first example, 4, okay? Another example for you, if I have, let's say 1 times 1. 1 times 1 is equal to 1, so that means that the number 1 is also a perfect square number because it is some number multiplied by itself. In this case, 1 times 1 does give you 1. Okay, now the last example I'll do like this, 3 times 3, that's equal to 9, which means 9 is also a perfect square number. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to make a list of perfect square numbers that will go in your notes, and hopefully eventually you sort of have memorized, like in your brain, you just know that these are the perfect square numbers. Okay, we're going to start with the number 1. So 1 is a perfect square number. 4 is also a perfect square number. 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100. Okay, so those are the first 10 perfect square numbers. 1, 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81, 100. Each of those is some number multiplied by itself. Now, what number is multiplied by itself to give you those numbers? Well, I will make that a separate list down here, and we'll maybe do that in, let's just do it in blue maybe. 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 3 is 9, 4 times 4 is 16, 5 times 5 is 25, 6 times 6 is 36, 7 times 7 is 49, 8 times 8 is 64, 9 times 9 is 81, and 10 times 10 is 100. So let's see, where do we start getting spaced out here? So 25 would be 5, 36 would be 6, 49 would be 7, 64 would be 8, 81 would be 9, and then 100 would be 10, okay? So these blue numbers here, you guys, sort of line up with what number multiplied by itself is going to give me my perfect square number. So if you were asked what number multiplied by itself gives me 36, you would answer, well, 36, well, 6 gives me 36. Okay, what number multiplied by itself gives me 81? Well, 9 times 9 gives me 81. What number multiplied by itself gives me 9? 3 times 3 gives me 9. Okay, so our list of perfect square numbers is matched up now with what number, when I multiply by itself, gives me that perfect square number. Okay, and that sort of leads us into this idea of a square root. So when you are asked to calculate a square root, the first thing that you're going to see is a symbol that looks like this. Okay, it looks like a divide box with a weird little kicker on here. Okay, so this symbol is what we call a radical symbol. Okay, a radical symbol. And that radical symbol, if you don't see anything else attached to it, which we won't really get into until later, If you don't see anything attached to it, it always implies a square root. Okay? And now the next question is, what does a square root mean? Well, a square root is asking what number times itself or multiplied by itself gives me the number under the radical symbol. Okay, that's what a square root is asking. What number, when I times it by itself, gives me the number under the radical symbol? Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of some of this stuff about perfect square numbers. Hopefully you have that written down somewhere. And we're just gonna get rid of all that stuff. So I'm gonna draw for you or write for you an example square root. Oops, square root. Let me go back to this. Of, let's say, the square root of 49. Okay, the square root of 49. So again, that square root is asking this question. What number times itself gives me, in this case, 49? What number multiplied by itself gives me 49? Well, if you have your list of perfect square numbers, we should be able to pretty quickly find that 7 multiplied by itself again equals 49. 7 times 7 is 49. Therefore, the square root of 49 equals 7. Okay, so this would be my answer. Square root of 49 equals 7. All right, now, when you are working on the IXL topic that I've assigned for tomorrow, you will probably see some numbers bigger than 100, okay? So if you see a number bigger than 100 and they ask you to find the square root of it, find on your calculator a button that looks like that radical symbol, okay? And then you can either, some of your calculators, you might have to type the number in first and then hit that square root symbol and it'll find it for you. Or you can hit that symbol and then put the number in after that, hit enter, it should find the square root for you. Okay, so feel free to use your calculator when the numbers get above 100, but I think anything up to 100, we should be able to use our list. So the square root of 49, we should know equals 7. The square root of 25, we should know equals 5, et cetera, and so on. Okay, now, the other thing that we need to potentially understand or be prepared for is what if we see a square root of, let's say, 70. Square root of 70. What number times itself gives me 70? Well, there isn't one, right? 70 is not in our list of perfect square numbers. So if you are asked to find a square root that is not a perfect square number, probably what you'll be asked to do is tell me what two numbers does it fall between? Okay, what two whole numbers does this square root fall between? So in this case, for the square root of 70, I want you to realize two things, okay? Number one, if I look in my list of perfect square numbers, the number that I see that's kind of right before 70 is 64, right? And the number that I see that's right after 70 would be 81. So, right, the number right before 70 in my list is 64. Right, that's as high as I can get in my list without going over 70. And then if I start at 70 and just look for the very next number in my list, the next number after 70 would be 81. Okay? Now, if we know the square root of 64 and we know the square root of 81, the square root of 70 must be in between those. Okay? So from our list, we should know, hopefully, that the square root of 64 is equal to 8 and that the square root of 81 is equal to 9. So what that tells me is the square root of 70 must be between 8 and 9. Okay? Between 8 and 9. So that's a strategy that you can use to find what two numbers is this square root in between up to 100. Okay? Now, the easiest way, if I just do another example over here, the easiest way to do a square root that doesn't work out very well on your calculator, if it's a number bigger than 100, for example, let's say 180. Okay, the square root of 180. If you were to punch that in on your calculator, it would come out to somewhere in the, 13.4, something like that. It'd be a crazy long decimal that does not work out very nicely. Okay, and unfortunately, our list that we've created doesn't go up to 180. So I can't do this method where I just go a little bit lower, a little bit higher in my list and find that. So when we use our calculator, if this were to come out to equal 13 point blah, 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 whatever it is, 13.4782564. Again, I'm just making those digits up. But when we get a square root that is 13 point something that looks real crazy, we know immediately that the square root of 180 must be between 13 and 14, right? Because think, for example, 13.5. If it came out 13.5, that's halfway between 13 and 14. 13.5 or 13.746 is also somewhere between 13 and 14, okay? So if you have a number bigger than 100, again, you can use your calculator to do that, or a calculator on your Chromebook should have the square root ability as well. If you get a decimal answer, just know that that square root number is in between those two integers, okay? It's in between this number and then the next number up. Okay, so if it comes out 7.425, we know it's between 7 and 8. Okay, if it comes out 26.3, we know it's between 26 and 27. Okay. If you have questions or concerns about anything as you're working through your IXL practice, please reach out to me by email, phone, or Zoom office hours. Otherwise, that's all I have for you in this video. We'll see you later.